The boardroom was glass-walled, perched on the 47th floor of Drake Biotech's headquarters, with Lake Michigan stretching out like a steel blue mirror behind me. I was midway through a quarterly strategy meeting when my phone buzzed. I rarely check my personal line during these sessions, but the caller ID made me freeze. Elena. I stepped out without a word. The door closed behind me with a soft click. The moment I answered, her voice cracked through the line. John, it's Maddie. She's taken a turn for the worse. The hallway around me blurred. I felt my pulse spike, not with panic, but cold calculation. What happened? The hospital called. She's not responding to fluids. Her labs are off. They think it could be organ involvement now. I said nothing. My brain was already cycling through worst-case scenarios and who I needed to call. I'm on my way. I hung up before she could say anything more. Driving through Chicago in late fall meant gray skies and roads slick with rain. I barely noticed. My thoughts were back in that hospital room with my daughter's pale face and the IV lines snaking out of her arms. Madeline, my only child, had been healthy, athletic until 6 months ago. It had started small. Fatigue, some bruising. Elena thought it was stress from college, but things spiraled fast. Muscle weakness, tremors, even temporary memory loss. We took her to every specialist in the Midwest. Rheumatologists, neurologists, hematologists. Nobody could agree on a diagnosis. The only consistent thing was that her condition got worse every few weeks like clockwork. I pulled into Northwestern Memorial's underground lot and headed straight to the elevators. By the time I stepped into Maddie's room, Elena was already there, seated in a corner chair, red-eyed but composed. Madeline was asleep, thinner than I remembered even 2 days ago. Her hair was brittle. Her skin had a strange yellow-gray hue, like something slowly fading from within. She stirred and blinked at me. Dad, I'm here, sweetheart. I sat beside her and took her hand. It was cold, limp. My chest tightened. How are you feeling? She offered a weak smile. Same. Maybe worse. They still don't know what's wrong. Her voice was barely audible. I glanced at Elena, who was avoiding my eyes. She fiddled with her wedding ring, always a bad sign. Where's Dr. Mercer? I asked. He's consulting with the tox team, Elena said quickly. He thinks it might be environmental. Environmental, I repeated, keeping my voice even. In our home, he didn't say exactly. I nodded, letting the silence stretch just enough to make her uncomfortable. By late afternoon, Mercer returned. Tall, silver-haired, polished. Too polished. He looked like he belonged at a conference podium, not at a sick girl's bedside. Mr. Drake, he greeted me, then turned to Elena with a tight smile. Mrs. Drake, I'd like to run additional panels, he said. Her profile is suggesting patterns of chronic exposure to something, possibly chemical, possibly heavy metals. What kind of exposure? I asked. He hesitated. The symptoms could be consistent with thallium, among other things. It's early, but I caught it. A flicker. Not in his face, but in Elena's. Not fear, anticipation. She looked down quickly. Do whatever you need to, I said. Cost isn't an issue. He nodded and left to order the tests. That night, back in my study, I pulled up a secure folder on my encrypted drive. A week ago, I'd installed new listening devices in the house. At first, it was just to confirm the affair I suspected. What I found instead chilled me. I queued up a file recorded 3 nights ago. The voices were clear. Elena, it's taking too long. She's stronger than we thought. Mercer, we have to go slow. If we increase the dose too fast, tox screens will flag it. It has to look natural. Elena, and him, Mercer. Once she's gone, he'll be vulnerable. That's when we move forward. I paused the recording. My daughter wasn't sick. She was being poisoned deliberately, slowly, methodically, by her own mother, and the doctor trusted to save her. I didn't feel fear. I felt purpose, and they were going to learn one mistake at a time that they had targeted the wrong man's daughter. The next morning, I didn't go into the office. I told my assistant I'd be offline all day and turned off my corporate phone. For the first time in over 2 decades, Drake Biotech would have to run without me for 24 hours. I had other priorities, now deadly ones. By 7:45 a.m., I was seated in my home office, blinds drawn, listening again to the recording. I didn't need to. I already had every word memorized. It wasn't just the content, it was the casual tone in Elena's voice. No grief, no hesitation, just strategy. Her words echoed. Once she's gone, he'll be vulnerable. They hadn't just been poisoning Madeline. They were planning to use her death to manipulate me, to drive me into grief and confusion. My company was heading into a multi-billion-dollar merger with Bastion Pharmaceuticals, and I held controlling shares. If something were to happen to me, if I were seen as mentally or emotionally unfit, Elena would inherit my stake and gain de facto power. It was as clinical as it was monstrous. But this wasn't about business. This was about my daughter. I called Dr. Sonia Patel, a toxicologist I'd met years ago at a conference in Minneapolis. She was one of the most respected names in environmental poisoning and worked out of the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. She picked up after 2 rings. "Drake, I need your help." Quietly, immediately. "Jonathan," she said, already alert. "This about your daughter, yeah. I believe she's being poisoned. Thallium or something similar. I need a full panel done outside hospital protocols, quiet and fast." She was quiet for a second. "I'll be in Chicago by 2 p.m. Don't speak to anyone else about this, especially the treating physician." "I won't. I already didn't trust anyone." Back at the hospital, I wore the same bite from yesterday, deliberately rumpled. I looked like a grieving, sleepless father, exactly the image I needed. Elena was by Madeline's bed feeding her spoonfuls of ice chips. "She had a rough night," Elena said without looking at me. I imagined she did. I didn't sit. Mercer around. He's in the lab checking blood work. Convenient. I waited until Elena left to get coffee before I texted Dr. Patel to enter through the south stairwell. I met her in the hallway outside the ICU, introduced her to the 2 private security guards I'd hired, and gave her a lab coat from a contact on staff. 10 minutes, she said. "Get me her vitals, most recent labs, and anything she's ingested in the last 24 hours. Within moments, she had her samples, blood, urine, hair, and a tissue swab. She slipped out as quietly as she came. At lunch, Elena and I sat in the cafeteria. The food in front of us was untouched. She stirred a cup of coffee, absently, still playing the role of the exhausted mother. "You seem distant," she said finally. "Our daughter is dying," I replied. "How do you expect me to act?" "I know this is hard," she said, reaching out and grazing my hand. "We'll get through it together." I pulled my hand back. She blinked. "John." I looked at her calm as glass. "You sure you want to finish that sentence?" Before she could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Patel. "Samples collected. Early indicators suggest thallium exposure. Confirming now. Full results in 6 hours." My blood felt like ice. "Nambaseo." By the time I returned to the room, Mercer was waiting. "I'd like to propose a new protocol," he said. "An intensive chelation therapy combined with experimental nutrient cycling. We're seeing signs of neurological decline, and I believe this may—" "No," I cut him off sharply. He blinked, caught off guard. "No new treatments. Not without a second opinion and a full toxicology review." "With all due respect, Mr. Drake, time is critical. That's why we're not gambling on guesswork," I said. He held my gaze for a moment too long. I returned it unblinking. Eventually, he nodded and excused himself. Elena turned to me. "What are you doing?" "I'm protecting my daughter," I said flatly, "and maybe uncovering what's really killing her." Her mask faltered, just for a second. Then she stood and left the room. Only 6 hours later, I met Dr. Timur Patel in a small consultation room just off the lab floor. She held a folder like it contained the nuclear codes. "It's thallium," she said. "High levels, chronic exposure, at least 3 months." This wasn't accidental. My throat tightened, but I nodded. "Can she recover?" "With proper chelation." "Yes, but we need to start immediately and keep her away from whoever's dosing her." "She's already under private guard," I said. Patel handed me the report and locked eyes with me. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing. If you hadn't caught it now—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I had the proof. My daughter could be saved. Now came the hard part, making them pay. Detective Raymond Cruz looked exactly how I'd hoped he would, unimpressed, seasoned, and entirely uninterested in pleasantries. His office at the Chicago PD was plain worn metal desk, coffee-stained file folders, and a ticking wall clock that sounded louder than it should have. He flipped through the toxicology report I'd handed him, scanning the highlighted lines with a tight jaw. "You sure this Dr. Patel is legit?" "She's with Mayo Clinic," I said. "And if that's not enough, I'm happy to have the Chicago Medical Board back it up." Cruz grunted. "You're telling me your wife and your daughter's doctor have been poisoning her for months so they could take over your company? I'm telling you, they've got motive, means, and now proof." He leaned back, rubbing a finger under his chin. "It's a hell of a story, Drake. But we don't get to arrest people based on stories. We need evidence, footage, fingerprints, witnesses. And if they're smart, there won't be any." "Let me worry about that," I said. "I just need you to keep this quiet for now. I've already started the process. I've got the hospital's security director reviewing access logs and surveillance footage. 3 months of who entered Madeline's room and when, with a sizable donation to their foundation, of course. Cruz cracked a grin. You corporate types sure know how to grease a wheel. No, I said, I just know what justice costs. But back at the hospital, I was stone. Elena acted like nothing was wrong, sitting beside Madeline's bed with forced calm, bringing her soup, fluffing her pillow, talking about Christmas break. It would have looked like motherly concern to anyone else, but I watched her hands, her eyes, the way she didn't flinch when Madeline cried out in pain, the way she offered comfort at the exact moments a parent would typically panic. She wasn't comforting. She was observing. Madeline, though frail, was sharper than I expected. That night, as I sat alone by her bedside while Elena stepped out to take a call, Madeline stirred. Dad? Her voice was raspy. I think I heard something. I leaned in. Tell me. Last week. I pretended to sleep. I heard Mom and Dr. Mercer. She said something about doses, about you. What exactly did she say? That they needed to wait? That if you were grieving, you wouldn't fight? That the merger would be easier? Her eyes filled. Are they trying to hurt you too? I took her hand. No, they just underestimated the wrong people. 2 days later, the hospital security director called me into a private viewing room. I sat in front of 3 monitors as he loaded up time-stamped footage from Madeline's room. Most of it was standard nurses' text routine visits. But then something strange. Dr. Mercer entering the room late at night after hours. No nurse, no chart updates, just a few minutes. Then again 2 nights later, always alone. And then Elena, same behavior. Always in the room longer than needed. Once she came in at 3:12 a.m., stayed 7 minutes. No documentation. We logged 8 unscheduled visits from either Mercer or Elena in the past 2 months, most of them during critical downturns in Madeline's condition. I took screenshots, exported logs, had everything burned to a secure drive. This was no longer theory. This was evidence. Detective Cruz met me that evening in a blacked-out city SUV parked a block from the hospital. I've seen enough, he said. I'm moving this to a criminal investigation. We'll have uniformed officers at her room within the hour. No one administers medication without oversight in Mercer. He's being called in for questioning tomorrow morning. Your wife, too. Separately. Let's see who breaks first. Don't underestimate either of them, I said. They're dangerous, and they're desperate. Dangerous people always are, Cruz said. But I've got daughters, too, so you've got me on this, all the way. That night, Elena came home to find her keycard deactivated and 2 private guards stationed on the front gate of my Lake Michigan estate. I wasn't taking chances. If she wanted to speak to me, it would be in court or behind glass. She screamed, threatened, cried. I watched her from the 2nd floor through the window, never flinching. When her voice finally gave out, she left. Downstairs, I poured a glass of rye and checked my messages. One stood out, an encrypted voicemail from an unknown number. They're on to me. We need to accelerate. She's going to wake up soon and everything will fall apart. Meet me. Tonight. The voice was Mercer's. I stared at the speaker for a long time before I hit delete. He was right about one thing. Everything was about to fall apart. Just not for me. The headline hit the wires just after sunrise. Prominent Chicago doctor and wife of biotech CEO under investigation for poisoning their daughter. It spread like a controlled burn. CNBC ran a segment within the hour. Bloomberg followed. Social media went nuclear. At the center of the firestorm was a photo of Elena and Mercer smiling at a fundraiser just 3 months prior. The story had leaked from an anonymous hospital source, which was technically true. I'd used a legal intermediary with no direct ties to me or the company. Drake Biotech's PR team scrambled to respond. I made sure they had a boilerplate denial, a vague comment about respecting the investigation, and instructions not to mention Madeline's name. Privately, I made a second call to the executive team at Bastion Pharmaceuticals. Until this is resolved, I said the merger is off the table. They didn't argue. My company's stock had dropped 11% in pre-market trading. But what they didn't know was that I had a poison pill clause built into our bylaws. Any hostile shift in controlling shares, especially following a scandal, would automatically void the deal. Elena's plan to use my grief and stock drop to gain majority influence had just imploded. At the hospital, I walked into Madeline's room with a stack of fresh flowers and 2 security guards behind me. Elena was already there, seated by the window, her expression pinched and pale. We need to talk, she said. Later, I replied. I said, now, Jonathan. No, I said coldly. You don't get to dictate anything anymore. She stood up sharply. You leaked this. You made this public. I protected our daughter, I said, keeping my voice level. You tried to end her. Madeline stirred in the bed. Elena's eyes flicked toward her reflexively. Don't I warned? You don't speak to her again without her permission. And I promise you she has none. A uniformed officer entered the room. Mrs. Drake, we're going to need you to come with us. Wait, what? It's a preliminary detainment, the officer said. You'll be questioned downtown. Elena looked at me with sheer disbelief. You're really doing this? I leaned closer. You were willing to kill our daughter for money and power. This is just the beginning. She said nothing as the officer escorted her out. Madeline opened her eyes weakly as the door shut. Was that Mom? Not anymore, I said. Chum. Later that evening, Detective Cruz and I stood in a dim hallway near the hospital security center. On a monitor, Mercer stood in an interrogation room. Arms folded, eyes dead. He's not talking, Cruz said. Keeps asking for a lawyer. Claims he was manipulated by your wife. Of course he does. What he doesn't know, Cruz continued, is that we found injectable thallium vials hidden in a cabinet in his home, labeled as mineral research samples. Dumb move. A slow smile tugged at my mouth. He underestimated how loud silence can be. You're good at this, Cruz said. Makes me wonder if this was personal or professional. I stared at the screen. Both, and neither. That night, I met with Dr. Sonia Patel again to begin Madeline's new treatment protocol. Chelation therapy, carefully monitored. No one but Patel's vetted team was allowed to touch her meds. As Madeline slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, I stepped outside and called my asset manager. I need a forensic audit of all shared accounts, I said. Elena's been moving money. I want it tracked. You suspect offshore, I already know. I just need the receipts. By dawn, my inbox held more than financial logs. The offshore account was Real Cayman Islands under an alias that traced back to a dummy LLC Elena had set up during a wellness retreat in Miami last year. The balance over $2.1 million. Money siphoned slowly from our joint holdings over 3 years. Quietly. Strategically. She'd been planning this long before Madeline got sick. That changed the game. This wasn't just a murder attempt. It was corporate espionage, financial fraud, and calculated betrayal. And it wasn't over. The next day, as reporters circled our home, I issued a statement to the press. Our family is facing an unimaginable crisis. I am fully cooperating with law enforcement. My only focus is my daughter's recovery. Everything else can burn. It wasn't a lie. See, that evening I visited Madeline again. Her color was better, her voice stronger. She held my hand and asked, Dad, are we safe now? I didn't hesitate. No, not yet, but soon. I kissed her forehead and whispered, they wanted to take everything from us. And now they're going to learn what it feels like to lose everything instead. By the end of the week, Dr. Mercer was suspended from practicing medicine. Not quietly either. The Illinois State Medical Board announced it via press release, citing pending investigations into multiple allegations of misconduct, including medical tampering, falsified patient records, and unlicensed administration of toxic agents. His photographed head-bowed silver hair limp was on every local station by noon. I wasn't finished. That same morning, I activated the legal strategy I'd been assembling in the background. My team filed civil suits on behalf of 2 former patients of Mercer. Both families had lost loved ones after inconclusive complications under his care. What they didn't know until I showed them was that both cases bore traces of thallium exposure in archived blood work. Nobody had tested for it at the time. Now they had. 10 hours later, 3 more families joined. Mercer had a pattern, and I was drawing it in red ink. At the hospital, Madeline's recovery was slow but steady. The thallium was leaving her body molecule by molecule, but the damage, neurological, emotional, would take much longer. I feel like I've been buried alive, she said one morning, tears streaking her cheeks as I helped her sit up. And now I'm waking up to find out my mom put me there. I didn't try to offer comfort. I didn't lie. You weren't buried, Mads, I said. You were targeted, and we pulled you out. Is she going to prison? I nodded once. That's not even the worst of it. Sorry, and that night, Elena's defense attorney, a shark named Mark Daltrey, tried to contact me. He wanted to negotiate. I declined. Instead, I met him in court. The judge granted me a restraining order, full financial audit rights, and emergency power of attorney over any shared estate assets. Elena's bank accounts were already frozen, her credit lines canceled. The home in Aspen she secretly put in her name sees pending IRS review. Every safety net she had was gone. At the same time, I sent anonymous encrypted packets, copies of her Cayman transfers, undeclared foreign income and tax evasions to three places: the Department of Justice, the IRS Criminal Investigations Division, and the Chicago Tribune. I wanted her enemies to line up at her cell door. But then Mercer made his move. He flipped. Under pressure, facing decades in prison, he requested a formal plea deal. In exchange for reduced sentencing, he offered to testify that Elena was the mastermind, that she had orchestrated everything: Madeline's slow poisoning, the estate siphoning, and the manipulation of merger terms. He painted himself as her puppet, a willing, deluded fool in love. It was a brilliant lie, and it might have worked if I hadn't expected it. More than 2 days later, I submitted video evidence, hidden camera footage from Mercer's own apartment planted by a contractor I hired months ago. In it, he brags to a colleague. She thinks she's the one pulling the strings. Please, I wrote the dosage schedule. I picked the compound. I'm the reason that girl's organs were shutting down, not some desperate housewife in yoga pants. He laughed. The prosecutor replayed it in court, twice. Mercer's plea deal dissolved instantly. The judge ordered him held without bond. That same night, back at the estate, I sat by the fire with a glass of bourbon, watching the flames snap and twist. The phone buzzed beside me. Blocked caller ID, I answered. The voice on the other end was quiet, female, and trembling. Jonathan, Elena, I didn't think it would go this far. I made a mistake. You made several, I replied. You don't know what it's like being invisible to you, watching your world revolve around your company, your daughter. You tried to kill her, I said flatly. Save your justifications for your cellmate. I can help you, she said, suddenly urgent. I can testify against Mercer. I can flip it, make him the main culprit. They'll go easier on me. You know people. You can pull strings. If you help me, I'll... No, I said. Silence. Then slowly I spoke the last words I ever intended to say to my wife. You picked a man who poisons children. You chose money over your own blood. You used my grief as a tool. You're not a victim, Elena. You're a monster in pearls. And then I hung up. Damn. She screamed into the silence, but I didn't hear it. The line was already dead. So was my sympathy. A cold wind whipped off Lake Michigan. As I stood on the balcony of my office suite, watching the city crawl to life below, I'd once looked out at this view and thought only of growth margins, market share. Now I saw battlegrounds. Elena's arrest had made national news. Mercer's unraveling was daily headline fodder. But I knew something most people didn't. Courtroom justice is slow. Corporate justice is surgical. It was time for the final incision. I began with Bastion Pharmaceuticals. A month ago, they'd been licking their lips over our $30 billion merger. Now they were scrambling to avoid contagion. I called their general counsel directly. There's a clause in our draft, I said. Paragraph 27, subsection C. Reputational harm resulting in merger destabilization. He coughed nervously. That clause was intended for competitors. No, I corrected. It was intended for betrayals. By noon, the merger was dead. Their stock dropped now in after-hours trading. Mine stabilized overnight. Next, I turned inward. Using credentials I'd kept quietly since the company's early days, I accessed Elena's private company email archives files. I had a legal right to under spousal transparency laws, especially during criminal proceedings. What I found was worse than I expected. Dozens of encrypted emails between her and Mercer. Hidden behind medical jargon were chilling exchanges. Increase the intervals slightly. His attention will be split during earnings week. Once the Q3 stock dips, we trigger the clause and call Bastion. He won't be able to fight both. I can't wait to see the board vote him out. He'll be too broken to stop it. They weren't just planning to poison my daughter. They were planning to erase me. I packaged the emails and forwarded them anonymously to Detective Cruz and the federal prosecutor's office. 20 minutes later, Elena was hit with additional charges: conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion. And Mercer, I saved something special for him. Through a friend in medical legal review, I made a quiet call to Johns Hopkins, where Mercer had once worked. A formal complaint backed by my investigation's findings opened a dark chapter of his past. 2 more families stepped forward. Their children had died under Mercer's care over a decade ago. The evidence was circumstantial, but emotionally explosive. Civil suits followed. Media frenzy exploded. And Mercer, already cornered, finally snapped. I got the call at 4:12 a.m. Mercer attempted suicide in his holding cell, Cruz said. Correctional officers found him unconscious. He survived. Barely. Good, I replied. Cruz didn't answer. He didn't need to. At the hospital, Madeline was finally eating solid food again. She was still thin, still tired, but her eyes, those sharp, familiar gray eyes, were alive. She smiled when she saw me. You're winning, she said. I'm not here to win, I told her. I'm here to make sure no one ever tries something like this again. She reached for my hand. And what about you? What about me? You've been fighting for so long. What happens after? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. The next day, Elena tried again, this time through her lawyer. She offered a full confession, provided I used my influence to reduce her sentence to under 15 years and allowed her access to joint marital funds to pay her legal fees. In return, she would spare the company further scandal. The arrogance was astonishing. I declined, and then I did something even colder. I issued a press release signed personally thanking law enforcement for their continued pursuit of justice for Madeline Drake and all victims of medical betrayal. I included a link to a new scholarship fund, the Madeline Initiative for Medical Ethics, funded by the liquidation of Elena's seized Aspen property. The press called it a classy move. It wasn't. It was war. The final blow came a week later. Elena's face lit up every screen in the country as a federal indictment dropped. 19 counts, max penalty, 60 years. Her lawyer quit. Her friends vanished. Her name was poison. That night, I sat at the edge of Madeline's bed and told her everything. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just nodded. She took so much from us, she said. But I'm still here, and you're still you. I looked her in the eye. That's what they never understood. The courtroom was carved from marble intention. Every seat filled, every camera pointed. The gallery held reporters from CNN, Forbes, The Times. What they came for wasn't legal nuance. It was blood. A story that blurred the lines between high finance and attempted murder. I sat in the front row, Madeline's hand in mine. She was pale but steady. Elena sat just feet away at the defendant's table, thinner now. No makeup orange jumpsuit hanging off her like defeat. Her expression was unreadable. Not remorseful, just blank. Mercer, seated beside his own attorney, was visibly shaken. His right hand trembled. Probably nerve damage from the suicide attempt. I felt no sympathy. Judge Eleanor Graves entered, stern and slow. Her voice clipped like a surgeon making her first incision. Court will now hear final statements before sentencing. The prosecution didn't hold back. They laid out the timeline in clinical devastating order. 6 months of hidden poisoning, falsified lab tests, fabricated treatment plans, and wire transfers designed to dismantle my company and consolidate control under Elena. They played audio. They showed video. They presented email after email, Mercer writing dosage instructions, Elena confirming financial access, both of them discussing the timeline of Madeline's decline. A blueprint of betrayal. Then they asked for the maximum 30 years for Dr. Mercer for violating his oath, weaponizing his profession, and attempting to murder a patient. 25 years for Elena Drake without parole for orchestrating, enabling, and financing this plan against her own daughter and husband. I watched Elena's lawyer stand shuffle papers and clear his throat. He began with excuses, emotional detachment, marital neglect, financial dependency. He portrayed Elena as a woman driven to the brink, not a monster. Then he made the mistake of looking at me. Mr. Drake is a powerful man. One might argue he drove her to desperation. His distance, his obsession with work, the coldness in the marriage I stood. The entire courtroom turned. Your Honor, I said, my voice calm but lethal permission to speak. Judge Graves studied me, then nodded once. You may proceed, Mr. Drake. I stepped into the center of the room, every eye locked on me. Elena Drake was not driven, I said. She planned. She wasn't desperate. She was deliberate. She wanted power, not to be seen, not to be loved, not to be heard, just to control. I turned to the jury box, then the press row. She poisoned our child, not for money, for leverage. She knew our daughter's death would destroy me. She counted on it, because in that grief she would gain everything. Control of my company, my silence, my legacy. I looked at Elena last, and she would have gotten away with it if Madeline hadn't lived. I returned to my seat. Madeline squeezed my hand. The courtroom was so silent I could hear her exhale. When Judge Graves returned with her ruling, she didn't hesitate. Dr. Aaron Mercer, for attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, and medical malpractice. I sentence you to 30 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. Elena Drake, for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison. You are to serve the full term. This court finds both defendants devoid of remorse. You used a child as a weapon. You violated the sacred trust of medicine and motherhood. You will pay for it in time and history. The gavel came down like thunder. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I made one statement, short and final. This was never about revenge. It was about protection and accountability. My daughter survived. That's more than either of them ever deserved. We left through the side entrance. No cameras, no applause, just wind and truth. That night, I received a call from Detective Cruz. They processed both of them, he said. But thought you'd want to know. Mercer's already on suicide watch again. And Elena, what about her? She's in Gen Pop for now, but word spreads fast in prison. Tried to kill your kid isn't exactly something you want on your resume behind bars. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, because I didn't feel anything. Not triumph, not grief, just silence. Madeline and I sat on the back porch wrapped in thick blankets, the fire pit between us, crackling low. She sipped tea, eyes fixed on the lake. Do you think she ever loved me? She asked. I didn't lie. I think she loved what you could give it, Rune. Control? Leverage? Sympathy? Madeline nodded slowly. That's not love. No, I said, it isn't. She leaned her head against my shoulder. And for the first time in months, we didn't talk about courtrooms or toxins or betrayal. Just the cold. And how the fire kept it away for now. 6 months later, the house was quiet in the way only peace makes it quiet. No more investigators at the gate. No more reporters in the driveway. No more court summons, medical scans, or whispered updates outside sterile ICU doors. Just the lake, and the sound of my daughter laughing. I stood on the second-floor balcony of our Lake Michigan estate, watching Madeline down by the shore playing volleyball with 2 friends from Northwestern. She was thinner, sure. Scar tissue still clung to her stamina, but her face glowed. Her laughter was real, not forced, not shadowed, real. I had seen her on the edge of death. Now I was watching her come back to life. Inside, my phone buzzed. A secure message from a correctional contact. No subject line, just one sentence. Inmate Elena Drake admitted to hospital after altercation. Condition stable. Placed in protective custody. I stared at the screen for a moment, then powered the phone off. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to chase. Elena was alive. But she had lost everything that made life worth living. Her money, her status, her reputation, her daughter's trust. The very concept of legacy erased. Some might say it was cruel. I disagreed. It was appropriate. That evening, Madeline and I sat out by the fire pit again, the air heavy with spring. She pulled her knees to her chest, nursing a warm mug of cocoa, like she used to when she was 10. You know, she said softly, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found that recording. If you hadn't hired the investigator, if I hadn't remembered that conversation, you'd be dead, I said, calm but firm. She nodded. And she'd still be smiling in front of the cameras. Exactly. Madeline looked into the fire for a long time. Do you regret it? What part, all of it? Destroying them, publicly, legally, personally. Do you ever think, maybe it was too far? I thought about that, about Mercer in solitary broken, about Elena clawed in prison hallways by women who'd lost their own children and weren't in the mood to forgive, about the wealth gone, the name scorched. The empire protected, but at a terrible cost. No, I said, not even once. She glanced at me, studying my face the way her mother used to. Why not? Because you're still here. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I wrapped an arm around her. For a moment, it felt like the old days, like the world had not been turned inside out. But it had, and we were still standing. Do you believe in forgiveness? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I believe in justice, I finally said. And I believe some debts should never be forgiven because the cost to forget them is too high. Because people like your mother count on forgiveness. They use it, hide behind it. Madeline exhaled slowly. Yeah, I think I believe that too. The next day, I signed a trust in Madeline's name, an irrevocable fund that would ensure she never had to rely on the Drake legacy to survive. It was hers now untainted. No corporate obligation, no family curse, just freedom. Later that week, we launched the Madeline Foundation, supporting victims of familial medical abuse and whistleblowers in healthcare. It wasn't about guilt. It was about legacy, mine, yes, but hers too. I know what people say about me now, that I'm ruthless, that I buried my enemies, that I burned down 2 lives to save one. They're wrong. I buried the truth for too long. I let silence build a coffin around my daughter's body. And when I finally broke that silence, I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for clarity, for justice, for the kind of father I always promised I would be. In the world I come from, you don't get second chances. You get consequences. And some sins, they don't fade. They stain. Now I spend most mornings walking by the water, watching Madeline thrive, reclaiming what time had tried to steal. Elena will serve every day of her sentence. Mercer won't see daylight again. And I live quietly now, but never silently, because silence nearly killed the only person I ever truly loved. And I won't let that happen again.